The last significant change in the way we educated our kids occurred around 124 years ago. It was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. Most kids were raised on farms, and jobs were plentiful and predictable. Then, in 1843, an educator from Massachusetts decides to visit Prussia on his honeymoon, where he witnesses a brand new type of education. Up until that time, education primarily consisted of smart people sitting around talking to other smart people. But after the Prussians were embarrassed in the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s, this Prussian decides to institute a new type of education for every German boy from 7 to 14 years old, which results in a more fit, more organized, more obedient army. Among his many reforms was this idea: to divide up instruction according to age, ability, and subject matter. Strange as it seems today, this had never been done before. This idea of teaching math in one room, science in another room, language skills in yet another was totally new. Horace Mann witnesses this new educational model and he's stunned. Inspired by what he sees, he brings these educational ideas back to the US, where it captures the attention of these men. Just like the Prussians, who were anxious to develop more obedient troops, these fathers of the Industrial Revolution were desperate to transform our nation of disorganized farm laborers into trained, efficient workers for their factory and assembly line jobs.
We divide the day up in high schools into bits of time, into 40 or 50-minute blocks typically, and then we ring bells and people start to shuffle around the building and do something else. That's an organizational device, it's not an educational principle. And it is, in broad sweeps, a system that resembles a factory culture.
If you built a factory in upstate New York and another along the Ohio River, you desperately needed these workers to behave similarly, to know the same kinds of things. If high school graduates in Ohio could quote Shakespeare, but students in New York couldn't even write their own name, it was difficult to build a standard set of factories which utilized both sets of workers. That's when it was decided to form a committee called the Committee of 10. The committee was tasked with coming up with a standard set of subjects every kid should know.
10 university heads in 1890 said, in 11th grade, everyone should learn chemistry. In senior year, everyone should learn physics, and that it should be earth science. They came up with this whole trajectory calculus, and a lot of these subjects are great, but these priorities were dictated 120 years ago, 124 years ago.
Back in 1892, the Committee of 10 designed our nation's curriculum, and for the most part, it has not changed.
The current systems of education fails to recognize that all students are people, that they have feelings, they have motivations, they have aspirations, they have lives and biographies and circumstances. And as soon as you miss that point, as soon as you start talking about students as data points, you're in big trouble. And the trouble's evident. We've got hundreds of thousands of people going to college every year. And when they leave, they are not in anything like the situation that college graduates used to be in. It used to be the case when I was at college that if you had a college degree, it was pretty much a guarantee of a job, pretty much. It's not now.
As we go from an industrial economy to an information economy, our most valuable part of capital in the economy is no longer going to be industrial capital, it's going to be human capital. That's going to define which nations succeed. That's going to define which nations have a broad and rich middle class. That's going to define which nations are innovating, which nations are strong militarily. It's all going to be based on how innovative and creative and entrepreneurial its people are, how much ownership they have, how much curiosity they've been able to retain through their life.
So I really think we need to put in place educational environments that help the kids understand that the world is an interesting place and their job is to go understand it, probe it, change it, and poke at it. Those are still skills I haven't seen computers display.
Right now, we are attempting to educate a generation of kids who will work in jobs that have not been invented yet. They will be called on to solve problems in a world so complex, we can't even imagine it. How do you design a school system that prepares kids for that? Over 100 years ago, the United States went from one-room schoolhouses to the robust industrial model we have now. It was a transformation that was nothing short of miraculous. Perhaps it's time for another transformation. Over the past 2 years, we filmed at schools all over the country. We visited private schools, charter schools, even traditional public schools and colleges. In each of them, we saw talented women and men in all grade levels taking bold steps to depart from the century-old educational model. Whether they were combining multiple disciplines, banning APs, giving teachers greater autonomy, focusing on depth of learning, offering real-world internships, having kids collaborate on projects. The common thread between all these schools is that the students appear to be working on things with a sense of purpose.
This is your best friend. Believe it or not, as heavy as it is, well, best friends usually have a little weight on them. So they're, you can't usually pick them up. But what's nice about this book is you can look things up if you're not sure. It has a little...
As I consider the kind of education I want for my own daughter, how do I predict what will give her the best shot at future happiness, at being successful, whatever that means? Even High Tech High would be the first to say that their particular approach isn't for every student. Of the schools we visited, no two were alike, and maybe that's the point. Education, real education, is messy, and any attempt to standardize it through federal or state governments or bureaucratic committees will lead to a system that ignores this one irrefutable fact.
Education is a complex human system. It's about people. And people are natural creatures. We're organic creatures. You know, we grow and we evolve and we change. And if you have an industrial metaphor in your head, then you're led into the sort of language that we now use about standardization. And the thing is, it's much more like gardening than engineering. If you're a gardener, you don't make it grow. I mean, the plant grows itself. You don't kind of attach the leaves and paint the petals and, and screw in the roots. I mean, the thing grows itself if you create the right conditions.